Old rail lines have become popular routes for hiking. These corridors connect towns and villages through the backcountry, which allows you to see a whole new view of the province and of the country. Many of them are part of the Trans-Canada Trail or the Great Trail, just like this one here in Guysborough, which, like so many others, is built on an old rail bed. Now, despite the fact that there is even a train caboose in this town, this trail has a little bit of a surprise. Despite being on the rail bed, it never had a railway. And that's where I'm on my walkabout today. That's right, this was never a rail line. But I'll tell that story a little bit later. In 1994, the Guysborough County Trails Association came together to establish this corridor as a multi-use trail and part of the Trans-Canada Trail. It opened in 1996, making it the first official section of the trail to open in Nova Scotia. Over the years since, it has seen numerous upgrades which continue to this day as funding is secured. The trail picks up in the town of Guysborough. It's the heart of this county and the government center. The town itself has a population of almost 1,000 people, though over 8,000 people live in the entire county. Guysborough is named for Sir Guy Carleton, who commanded the British troops in the First War of Independence and led the British defense of Quebec in 1775. In 1783, he commanded all British forces in North America and was responsible for the evacuation of Loyalists, British forces, and 3,000 black freedmen in 1783. Before heading to Quebec and New York, he spent time in Nova Scotia, and then later returned as the Governor-in-Chief of Quebec, Nova Scotia, New Brunswick, and what is now Prince Edward Island. Sir Guy Carleton has lent his name to other well-known locations in addition to Guysborough, including Ottawa's Carleton University and the Carleton in Halifax. This trail has loosely followed the highway and the stream for the last little while, ducking behind the small community of Sunnyville. Now that the stream is really close, that means the Mill Dam Pond is just ahead. Sunnyville itself was settled in 1784 by some of the former black slaves who came with Loyalist settlers to Guysborough. The Loyalists may not have believed in slavery, but that didn't mean they wanted black settlers living with them. So like so many places in Nova Scotia, black settlements were established just outside of the main British towns. Right through the 1900s, Sunnyville has maintained a strong black presence. So this is the Mill Pond or the Mill Dam Pond. The name varies depending on which map you look at. Originally, it actually supplied power, water power for a carding mill. That eventually got changed to steam power. After the carding mill closed, it then provided power to a sawmill on this site. Forestry has long been important in Guysborough County. Roughly 70% of the land in Guysborough County is forested, and it's a mix of soft and hardwoods. This county still has many small sawmills, and forestry generally remains a big employer. There are about 300 full-time jobs related to the industry here, in addition to many other seasonal and part-time roles. Another part of the forestry industry here is Christmas tree farming, with trees shipped all over the world. The Mi'kmaq name for the village of Guysborough is Shedabuktu. Unlike many places where the Mi'kmaq name has fallen into disuse, Shedabuktu is still in use here. While it's not used for the town of Guysborough, it's the name of the large bay out there looking towards Arichat and Ilmadam in Cape Breton. You can also see Horton's Cove, which is also known as Cook's Cove, and was named after Isaiah Horton, one of the 9 original settlers back in the late 1700s. He and his family cleared and farmed land all throughout the Salmon River Valley. And of course, fishing was important in the waters of the bay, but so too was the forest, which contained wood to provide shelter and fuel, and food in the form of animals like moose, deer, and rabbit. The name of this area evolved over time. The village of Guysborough first saw French European settlers in 1634, and numerous forts were built around the bay. Throughout the 1600s, there were a number of raids and battles. The French largely left the region during the expulsion, and those who remained were certainly gone by the time of the French and Indian War. It was the British who then renamed the village Guysborough. The trail is now turned away from Chedabucto Bay in the Atlantic Ocean and is heading along the Salmon River. Further back, near the mouth of the Salmon River, you could actually see Dickey Brook Power Plant in the distance. That hydro system was built in the 1940s and is capable of just over 3 megawatts of generation. There are dam spillways upriver at Donahue Lake and Tom Lake. Down near Salmon River are the powerhouse and the surge tank. Water is piped down to the powerhouse from the 2 lakes, which collect water from an area of over 45 square kilometers. The first section of trail that I'm hiking today ends here at Salmon River and these concrete abutments. Now, this being a rail trail, you might expect that these towers once hosted a railway bridge. They didn't. If you remember at the beginning of this hike, I mentioned that although this trail is on a rail bed, there was never a railway here. Well, after the break, I'm going to be continuing about 9 kilometers further up this trail to the village of Ogden. And I'll tell you the story of why there was never a railway in this corridor. But first, I have to get up to the road and cross the river.
Come on, won't you be mine? Feel the sunshine.
A rail line without a railway. Not even without a railway, but without rails. Now that would be unusual anywhere, but the length of this corridor makes it particularly unique. And it makes you ask questions. And when you ask those questions, you find out that the story behind why there was never a railway here is a story of political intrigue. If you know Canadian history, then you know that the late 1800s were the railway age. It seemed like every part of the country, every community was getting a railway. By 1897, only 2 counties in Nova Scotia lacked rail access, Guysborough and Victoria. For Guysborough, a railway was seen as incredibly important. Fish, farm products, minerals, and timber could all be more easily exported with a railway. And in turn, the population would grow with industry. Originally, plans envisioned a line continuing on from the Dartmouth to Musquodoboit line straight into Guysborough. However, this quickly changed, and a route through Sunnybray, connecting to an existing line to Stellarton, became the preferred corridor. Following the 1897 provincial election, the new Liberal government ordered the Dominion and Eastern Railway Company to survey the proposed route. You'd think that would be it then, right? But no. Unfortunately, a contract was not issued for the line, and no railway was built. The railway dream faded away, at least until 1901, when there was yet another provincial election and more plans for a railway, this time for both routes from Dartmouth to Guysborough and from Guysborough to Sunnybray. But the man leading that initiative died in 1905, and again, the dream came to an end. It took yet another provincial election, this time in 1906, to revive the idea of a railway yet again. This time, Sir Montague Allen, a man with ties to the coal industry, called for a route from Pictou County to Guysborough, with a spur line to Country Harbour. Allen wanted to develop a coal shipment facility on the water, but a dispute in Pictou County between New Glasgow and Stellarton about where the line should go, and financial problems in the coal industry killed the project once again. You know, that was by no means the end of the rail dream for Guysborough, and I'll get back to that story in a minute, but I wanted to stop here because there's a little path that goes over this way and takes you up to a hill called Sugarloaf. Sugarloaf's one of those names you hear all over the Appalachian Mountains. But Guysborough's Sugarloaf is a great example of the geologic formations in this area. This formation is made of basalt. It's hard volcanic rock, and it's also a rock type not only found on Earth, but on other planets in the solar system. For example, 80% of the surface of Venus is basalt. Geologists say this formation is from the Akkadian orogeny. That was a mountain building event over 400 million years ago. So back to the political intrigue of this railway. By now it's 1908, and the provincial government reaches a deal for construction of both the Dartmouth to Guysborough line and the Stellarton to Guysborough line. But 2 years later, there's yet another delay. This time, the project is delayed because the federal government decided to take over responsibility for the provincial branch lines on the railway and construction of new lines. Lines across the province were losing money, which is among the many reasons the Guysborough connection had become so difficult. Things were looking up. Sir Wilfrid Laurier's government called for tenders to complete both proposed lines in 1911 and awarded contracts just before they were put out of office by Sir Robert Borden's Conservative government. Borden's government limited the contracts to construction of a line from Dartmouth to Musquodoboit, located in Borden's own riding, and killed the Guysborough connections, which were located in a Liberal riding. It seemed the dream of a railway in Guysborough was dead. There may be no railway, but this corridor is used by all kinds of different users. This warming hut, was built by snowmobilers who are looking for a respite spot along the trails or just a place to stop. These huts are really important, and there are thousands of kilometers of snowmobile trail you can access from here. Even have a little guest book to sign. The railway project seemed dead. In 1921, the Liberals were returned to power, but couldn't get the railway project through the Conservative Senate. But in 1929, they found a way, and a construction project was announced to build the 67-kilometer line to Sunnybray, connecting on to Stellarton. This time, it was going to happen, and by the end of 1929, the contract was awarded to build the line. Things moved fast. Crews began work on construction and worked throughout the winter of 1929 and 1930. In fact, by the summer of 1930, the rail bed had been laid, the concrete abutments for bridges had been put in place, and there were even wooden trestles done. Not long after, half of the track coming out from Sunnybray had already been laid. Things were looking up. But then, politics came back into play. The Liberal government was defeated in 1930, and the new Conservative government, this time under R.B. Bennett, was facing a major depression. Work on the line was stopped immediately, and even the rails which had been laid were removed. When the Liberals came back to power just a few years later, they didn't continue the project. The outbreak of the Second World War changed priorities, and while there was an attempt to revive the project, after the war, it was never successful. This is the McAllister Suspension Bridge, built in 2000. The railway itself never actually had the bridges built, but through the hard work of volunteers over the years, they've used some of these concrete abutments that were put in 1929 and 1930 to build bridges like this, which allow hikers and other trail users to make use of this corridor. Now, long before the idea of a trail was imagined, the forest had already begun to reclaim this corridor, and it's through the hard work of many that this trail is now a reality. Guysborough County has long worked to improve its industrial base, and the railway here was part of that dream. This area of Nova Scotia can often seem remote, and I wonder how it would have been different if the railway had become a reality. Well, I'm reaching the end of this section of trail here in Ogden. After the break, I'll be picking up the next section and heading on to Salmon River Lake.
Won't you be mine? Feel the sunshine.
I'm in Ogden on the Trans-Canada Trail heading out of Guysborough on a rail line that never saw a railway. Of course, there's lots of other types of transportation using it now, from bikes to snowmobiles, ATVs, and of course, hikers. I'm heading towards Salmon River Lake and the Ogden Round Lake Wilderness area. Ogden largely survived on farming. It was named for Alfred Ogden, who was the Member of Parliament for Guysborough from 1876 until 1882. This section of the trail detours from the original rail bed more often than some of the earlier trail. Flooding of the river over the years has destroyed parts of the corridor, so the Trails Association has developed a new route where needed. I'm now entering the Ogden Round Lake Wilderness area. The next 1.5 kilometers of trail will travel through this area. Ogden Round Lake is about 3 kilometers north of here. There are other lakes in the wilderness area too, including North Branch Lake. This wilderness area is over 5,500 hectares in size and protects unique ecosystems in what is called the Mulgrave Hills Natural Landscape. There are tracts of rare old-growth deciduous forest here, which not only help the ecosystems thrive, but also offer excellent habitat for many species. This wilderness area is popular not only for hiking on this and other trails that pass through, but also for other activities like canoeing, fishing, and snowshoeing. Well, this is the north branch of the Salmon River. About 100 meters up that way is North Branch Lake. It's a huge lake, and most of it is in the wilderness area. And here on either side of this bridge, old concrete abutments. They got trees growing on them and moss. They're being overtaken by the forest. Reminders of a railway that never happened. After about 1.5 kilometers on the trail, I'm now leaving the wilderness area to continue on to Salmon River Lake. Probably seems unusual to find a spot like this in such a remote place. This is known locally as the hippie camp, and it dates back to the 1970s. At that time, the rail corridor would have been overgrown, and the wilderness area wouldn't have even been a dream. Back in the early 1970s, an American conscientious objector to the Vietnam War and his wife lived here on this plateau. They lived a subsistence living, growing vegetables, raising animals like chickens, goats, and rabbits. They are said to have made shoes to sell from old tires. They lived on a government allowance of $2.17 and had 2 children here. Remarkably, they lived here for 2 winters before moving on. Perhaps it was the rail corridor, while not then a formal trail, that allowed them to find this place. Imagine 4 people living in that small home. You know, that building was constructed with purpose. Its size and the shape are all about comfort and warmth. These days, the local trails community maintains that building as a reminder of the past. As I draw near to the end of this section of the trail, I am coming towards the communities of Erinville and Salmon River Lake. Erinville is on the north side of Salmon River Lake itself. It was named by the early Irish settlers of this area as a nod to their affinity for Ireland. Those settlers were by no means all from one place. Throughout the 1800s, this area welcomed people from Scotland and Sweden, among other locations. In fact, the very first European settler here was Scottish and not Irish. It was the family of Colin Porter, a lowland Scot and weaver. He settled on what became known as Porter River, which feeds into the other side of Salmon River Lake. As for the Irish, they arrived here mostly from Newfoundland, where they averaged only 2 summers and 1 winter, before deciding conditions were too harsh and packing it up for Nova Scotia. Salmon River Lake, the community, is where I'm now walking. It's the community where this section of trail ends, and it takes its name from the lake itself. The lake, the river, and the settlement were almost certainly named because the river was frequented by spawning salmon. And so here I am standing on yet another concrete abutment, across from a concrete abutment for a rail bridge that was never built. This is the end of my hike for today, but you can continue this trail across the lake by just following the road around and rejoining up with the trail. You can continue on to Stellarton and indeed all the way across Canada on this trail. Imagine all the men who would have worked those many years ago to build this rail line with the dream that a steam engine would once travel this corridor. It's a dream that was never realized. I can't imagine that they would have thought that this rail corridor would one day become a very popular hiking destination. There are lots of opportunities along this corridor for adventure, and that's exactly what I hope you find on your next walkabout.
Hey, come on, feel the sunshine. Oh, come on, won't you be mine? Hey, come on, feel the sunshine. Oh, come on, won't you be mine? Oh, hey, oh, hey, oh, hey, feel the sunshine. Oh, hey, oh, hey, oh, hey, feel the sunshine.